So we talked about Hinduism last week or earlier this week with the caste system. We looked at the caste system and the different levels. We talked about the metaphor of a god's body. We discussed the concept of reincarnation. So if your current life or status in the world is not sufficient, if you follow your dharma, your moral sense of duty and responsibility, you will get good karma, which means in your next life, when your soul enters a new body, you will move up the system, and eventually you will be in the body of a male Brahmin. If you acquire good karma as a male Brahmin, you can then enter moksha, which is a state of your soul no longer being reborn into a physical body. Okay, very similar as the Western concept of heaven, paradise, whatever you want. By the way, if y'all need anything over the course of this, if you have a question, you need me to spell something, I'm going to use the whiteboard here in a minute. I'm not going to be looking at the chat, so unmute and say something, okay? So just let me know, all right? So that's kind of where we left off, if I remember correctly, in all three of your classes. We were in about the same spot earlier this week. So just a couple other brief things about Hinduism, and then we're going to move on. I did mention, I think, to some of your classes, but I don't know if all, it is the world's third most popular religion. So you have Christianity, you have Islam, Hinduism is the third most popular religion, even though Hinduism does not spread well because it is up to over 700 million native Indians have that faith of Hinduism. So that is why there are so many Hindus in the world, even though it is not a religion that easily spreads. There is not a singular holy text. There are numerous books that have influence and significance, but there is not a Quran or a Bible, if you will. There's different texts that have different value to different people. The Vedas, the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, there are a variety of those texts that give some of the stories and details of the different gods. In general, Hinduism is described as polytheistic. There can be some debate about that amongst different people, but for the most part, it is believed to be many different gods. And if I had a particular word to describe the broad strokes of Hinduism, it is flexibility. You may worship these three gods and they're your favorite and you don't really worry about the other ones. Your friend in a different city may worship other gods and those are their favorites and that's what they focus on. It's really up to you. It is, and sometimes historically that was determined by caste, but it is your choice as to basically how you choose to process the faith and live the faith as a member of that religious group. So that is kind of a choice that you have in regards to that. Now, the last thing I want to do, unless you have any questions, which you're always welcome to ask, is I want to read a poem that is from the Rig Veda, which is one of the oldest Hindu texts, again, probably 4,000 years ago. And this is the story of creation. This is one version of Hindus' belief of how the world was created and humanity began. And then we want to briefly talk about how this might be different than other creation stories you may be familiar with. And so it's really short. It'll take about a minute.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, how much has Hinduism changed from when we're talking about like more ancient India to now?
Great question. And we'll get to this later, but the short version is this. India was a British colony for about 200 years. And when India became independent from British control in 1947, they created their own constitution, and part of that constitution has outlawed the caste system. You can no longer use the caste system to determine job, educational status. You certainly can't like fight people because they're of a different caste, that kind of thing. Now, do you simply sign a piece of paper and end 4,000 years of cultural tradition?
No.
No. So I'm sure if some of you have Hindu backgrounds, you know of your family's caste. Even if it doesn't play a factor in your life, it's just something you know. Something I experienced years ago. I coached the academic team, again, nerd, and we shared a bus with the kids from Manual because the coach for Manual at that time was my friend. So we took our kids to a tournament in Cleveland, Ohio. So we took a bus after school. We were staying in a hotel, all that good stuff. And we got to the hotel. It's like Friday night at 10 p.m. So it's been a long day for all of us. And there were two Indian kids on Manual's team. And one said to the other, meaning to be a joke, "Why don't you get my bags?" And the other kid got really upset. And come to find out later, because I didn't know these kids, the kid who was told, "Get your bags," his family historically was untouchable. And the kid who told him to get his bags in a joke, his family historically was Brahmin. And so that did not go well at all. So it's technically not something you can use officially, but it's definitely part of the culture still. How much depends on where you live and what your family values are.
Okay.
Okay, good question. Years ago, I'm getting too old for this now, but when I first started teaching to prove that the caste system was still part of the lives of modern Indians, I actually signed up for an Indian dating website, which is pretty interesting because to get the ads, you had to sign in. So I got some weird emails for a while. But anyway, and I showed them some marriage ads, like looking for a potential spouse, and every single one of them mentioned their caste.
Wait, so do they believe then like was caste like hereditary for them?
Oh,
Because I
yeah.
don't think. Okay.
Oh, yeah. That's how you know your caste. It's your family's caste. It's just who you are.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good questions. Thank you. So continuing on, I'm going to read this short poem here. And this is again from the Rig Veda, one of the oldest Hindu texts. And it's about creation. Who really knows and who can swear how creation came, when or where? Even gods came after creation's day. Who really knows? Who can truly say? When and how did creation start? Did he do it or did he not? Only he up there knows, maybe, or perhaps not even he. So that is from a Hindu holy text describing the process of creation. Does it give you a lot of specific detail? Doesn't give you any specific detail. So the word I would use to describe this is ambiguous. If something is ambiguous, shoulder shrug emoji. We don't really know. Okay? Much of our world right now is ambiguous. We have plans and we hope they work, but we don't know. Okay? Are we going to be back in school in person in a month? I hope so, but do you know? Because I don't. And I don't think our superintendent knows yet. I think we'll have to make a decision in 2 or 3 weeks, but for right now, we don't know. So it's not sure. Versus you have other religions that say creation happened in this way, in this many days, on this day that happened, right? That is the Judeo-Christian / Islamic tradition, and that is certainly different than what we're seeing here. So there's a lot of diversity, a lot of flexibility in how you practice Hinduism and how it impacts your daily life, and how, since the caste is technically illegal in India today, how it might impact your family or your way of living. Okay, so that's Hinduism, really big picture. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, moving to a different part of the world, because I'm trying to go in chronological order, because that makes more sense to me. Let's talk about Judaism for a couple minutes. Now, of the religions and philosophies we're talking about, Judaism is going to have the least amount of followers. There is estimated to be in the world today 12 to 13 million Jewish people. And many people who would call themselves Jewish don't practice the religion, but they consider it their cultural heritage. My freshman year roommate in college was Jewish, and he told me that like day 2. I was like, cool. So I was writing a paper like 6 months later in one of my classes, and there was something about Judaism, and I said, hey man, blah, 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 what about this? And he was like, I don't know. I said, aren't you Jewish? He said, yeah, I hadn't been to temple since my bar mitzvah. He said, it's my culture, but I am not a regular practicing member of the faith. And me, little Protestant white kid from the south end of Louisville, we didn't have any Jewish people that I knew at PRP High School back in the mid-1990s. That's where I went to high school. I'm a South End guy by trade. And I didn't know that. I was like, oh, I thought all Jews practice the faith. And he's like, no, it's a cultural group. I didn't know. So keep that in mind. When we talk about Jewish people, there are those who are culturally Jewish but don't practice the faith. Now, the most important fact about Judaism for our class is a pretty simple one. Anybody want to guess what the most important historical fact about Judaism is for a class like ours that only hits the big stuff?
Jesus, Jesus, God's son.
Okay. Well, not in Judaism, not actually. Okay. Judaism is the world's first blank religion. Does anyone know the blank?
Ethnic?
Nope. Hinduism is ethnic too. Judaism is ethnic. That is correct. No Jewish people have ever knocked on your door and tried to get you to convert. That is true. It deals with the number of higher powers.
Oh, yeah.
Monotheistic. There, I heard it from a couple of you. Monotheistic. Very good. Again, mono meaning one, thei meaning God or religion. Okay? Like theology, etc. Theology is the study of religion. So monotheistic, one God. The other thing is most prior religions, including Hinduism, the gods have often human characteristics. They act like humans. They have some of the same character traits. Sometimes they do that to show us how silly we are, but like Greek and Roman religion, many of their gods are jealous or angry or, commit adultery or do all sorts of terrible, immoral things. The Jewish God is monotheistic, but it is also an abstract God. God is not a person. God is a higher power that doesn't have any sort of like human form in that regard. So God is also perfect. So God sets a high moral standard versus if you read some of the ancient Greek stories about their gods or the Egyptian stories about their gods are just as bad, if not worse than we are. There's murder and incest and all sorts of bad stuff. So it's a different way of looking at a higher power. They're not based off humans. They are something better than humans. And you will see the Christians and the Muslims adopt a similar philosophy. And we will come to those religions. I don't think we'll get there today. That's something we'll probably get to either Tuesday or Wednesday of next week when I see you all then. Okay, but we'll talk about Christianity and Islam and their offshoots of Judaism. Okay, so there are what is sometimes called the Pentateuch, or Penta meaning 5. The first 5 books of the scripture, also called the Torah, are also important in both Christianity and Islam. In those first 5 books, they lay out the laws of the faith. They're called in Judaism the Mosaic laws, because the most famous of those laws, the 10 Commandments, are according to the faith given to Moses by God. Said that backwards. So those are the 10 Commandments, and those form the basis of belief also for Christianity and Islam and a lot of other moral codes around the world. You can't commit murder, you can't commit adultery, you shouldn't want other people's stuff, blah, 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 all those things, okay? There are 613 laws of Moses, many of which most of us have never heard of. But the 10 Commandments are probably the most famous. There's also laws about what kind of food to eat and how to eat it. And that word has entered our language sometimes to describe other situations, called kosher. So, for example, we're not supposed to mix meat and dairy, so we shouldn't eat a cheeseburger technically. And all sorts of other laws. A couple years ago, a man wrote a book, and it became a New York Times bestseller. It was called The Year of Living Biblically. And for 1 calendar year, he tried to follow all 613 rules set out in the first books of the Hebrew Scripture. He didn't make it. It was incredibly difficult. A lot of those rules, he was like, it's in a modern world, it's almost impossible to follow every single one. But the key figure for Judaism, in many ways, for also Christianity and Islam, is a man named Abraham. You will hear all 3 religions called Abrahamic religions. And there's a story you may be familiar with, you may not be, but basically Abraham is told as an old man that he and his wife, an old woman, will have children, and then their offspring will be the founding of a great new nation. Of course, that nation will eventually be Israel, the promised land of the Jewish people. But they're old, and so they're like, So we'll get into some of the details later, but eventually that does happen. They have a child, and through that child comes various other figures of Jewish, Christian, Islamic history. And we eventually get to like King David, King Solomon. If you're a Christian, we get to Jesus is from that lineage. If we're a Muslim, we get Muhammad out of that lineage. So Judaism has not many followers as a percentage of the world population, but it is the founding belief system that influences Christianity and Islam, the world's 2 most popular religions by number of followers. So that is, it's obviously impactful in many ways, but it is impactful maybe in a class like ours. It doesn't get too deep in the fact that it directly influences the creation of the world's 2 most popular religions. Okay, and it is the world's first monotheistic religion, a concept that numerous other faiths will copy over the coming centuries. All right. And again, there's more details we could get into, but for us, that's the big picture. I do want to mention one other concept, that we will use, or two other things. I'll do that. This is a word that will come up, and I apologize, the handwriting's bad. That is called diaspora. That is spelled D-I-A. That is supposed to be an S. D-I-A-S-P-O-R-A. D-I-A-S-P-O-R-A. I look forward to the day when I can use markers instead of this stylus, because I'm not very good with it. So a diaspora is when a group of people are forcibly removed from their homeland. We see this numerous times through history. The African diaspora involves slavery and the slave trade across the Atlantic Ocean 250 to 500 years ago. Because people are forced against their will, they often cannot bring a whole lot of materials with them, but they can bring culture, things like language or music or, food preparation, that kind of stuff. So without getting into too much detail, perhaps the most famous empire of the ancient world is the Roman Empire. And the Romans were generally tolerant of people they conquered because they didn't want people to fight against them. They wanted you to pay taxes and make them wealthy. That was why they conquered you. However, the Romans were polytheistic. They believed in many different gods. So one of their rules was, yes, you pay taxes, but you accept a couple of our gods and you can keep yours, and then we know that you have some loyalty to us. Of course, if you're a monotheist, why won't you accept a couple Roman gods?
Because you believe there's only one?
I believe there's only one. So 3 is not a compromise. It's unacceptable. So the Jews were labeled as troublemakers. So later were Christians for this very same reason in the Roman Empire. And so finally, the Roman emperors just got tired of dealing with these pesky Jews and later Christians, and they treated them horribly, as some of you may know. So in the year 70 CE, I don't need you to memorize this, I'm just giving you some context. So almost 2,000 years ago, the Roman army, which was probably the best in the world in its day, invaded Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish people. They killed many, they burned, they destroyed, but they kicked out the Jews, and they were removed from their homeland. This is a diaspora. So the Jewish people were forced to move all over the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and they spread out. And wherever they went, they were usually a small minority of people, and they were often treated poorly by whatever group of people, culture was hosting them. And so this is my second and final point, and then we'll move on. That is because historically there is only one kind of Jewish person. In the modern world, we create other branches of Judaism. But historically, the only major branch of Judaism is called Orthodox. And if you know the word Orthodox, you can use that in a variety of settings as an adjective. Orthodox means original. All right? So Orthodox Jews are going to dress a certain way. Men are going to wear yarmulkes, head coverings. They're going to have long forelocks on their sideburns, little hair that curls. They're going to wear long black coats. Women are going to wear long black dresses. They are going to strictly observe things like the Sabbath and doing no work on that day. They're going to keep the laws of kosher and food preparation very thoroughly. Orthodox Jewish students would not attend public school. They could not practice the tenets of their faith in a public school setting. So typically they attend their own private schools because they just can't participate in some of the things like different settings or different, that kind of stuff. Versus what's called Reform or conservative Jews can't. And I've had many Jewish students over the years. Heck, some of you may be Jewish, I don't know. But you can do so if you're a Reform or conservative. Men and women can worship together. In Orthodox, they worship separately. There's all kinds, so it's a more conservative, traditional form of Judaism. My point being this: they have to dress differently. They speak a different language. They eat different food. Oftentimes they were forced to live in the worst part of town, and a little bit of modern connection for you. In Italy, in the city of Venice, you may know the city famous for its canals instead of streets. Jews were forced to live in the worst part of town, which is where all the horse shoe people were and the metal workers, because it was really hot and stinky and it was loud, and they started working at 4 a.m, so you couldn't sleep, and there was a lot of chemicals, and it just wasn't a good place to live. The Italian word for metal is ghetto, which over time has hardened into from ghetto to ghetto. And so to this day, we often use that word to describe a bad part of a city or a town. That comes from the fact that Jews were forced to live in the worst part of town back in the ancient world. And so oftentimes the story of Jewish people and practitioners of that faith is one of persecution or one of being treated unfairly or blamed for things that was not their fault, but because they were different and dressed differently and spoke differently and all those things, they're often going to be accused of things they did not do.
Is that why Hitler referred to the place before concentration camps as ghettos?
Correct. It's from that. And then that etymology has come to mean oftentimes various parts of inner cities or different neighborhoods or whatever. Yes, that's where we get that term from. That is correct. Okay.
A few days ago, you mentioned that like public, or they didn't really have schools. But so was that just kind of like an example you gave of
Yeah,
they
like
had to have
a
their
modern example. Yes, a modern example. Correct. Yeah, we don't really have what we would call public schooling until about 200, 175 years ago. For most people, if they were educated historically, it's because they were wealthy and they could afford a private tutor. The first institutions of higher learning, what we'd call college or university, opened about 1400 years ago. Many of them in the Muslim world, actually, and we'll come back to that later, but yes. Sorry, sometimes I try to give modern examples to make historical things make sense. So if you're not quite sure which one I'm talking about, that's always good to ask. So thank you. So that's it for Judaism. We can spend a lot more time, but that's pretty much the fundamentals. If you remember two things, it's the first monotheistic faith that we can definitively prove had those beliefs, and it is the inspiration for Christianity and Islam, which are the world's two most popular faiths in terms of followers. All right, I want to head back to India. And now we're going to enter, it's still for us period 0. If this was the old AP world, we'd be moving into a new time period. Around 600 BCE, which you don't need to know the date, but a little later, because the civilization that you guys are working on that you're turning in next week is supposed to be thousands of years old, 4,000, 5,000. Now we're getting to like 2,500 years ago. This is called the classical era. It's still a long time ago. But if you like talk about a classic car, yes, it's old, but it's also nice. It's well maintained. They wash it. It's been polished. It's been restored. So our classic civilizations, I would argue, are the first time we start to see a lot of characteristics that influence the modern world. Okay? So things like the Romans, I already mentioned them. The ancient Greeks, the Maya of Central and South America. Civilizations in China and India that are that way. Civilizations in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're not going to get into the details of particular civilizations because we don't need to, but the next couple faiths and ideas we're going to talk about are created in the classical era. Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Christianity. Those are the big four we're going to talk about. I don't think we'll get all the way to Christianity, but we'll try. So let's start with Buddhism. Buddhism's named after a guy. His real name's Siddhartha. We know he lived. We have evidence of his life. He was born about 2,600 years ago. So again, right at the beginning of what we call that classical age. And Buddha was born in India. Buddha is a high caste Hindu. He is wealthy. He has servants. He lives a very comfortable life. He's pretty good. But somewhere in his late 30s, Buddha enters what you and I might call a midlife crisis. He starts to question his life. He starts to wonder what else there is. He lives in a really nice house. We'd probably call it a mansion. He doesn't go anywhere else. He has every need he has taken care of, but he kind of wonders what else is there. So the story goes that he lives a couple miles from a little village, a small town he's never visited. Because other people go to the village and get his food and, get materials and bring it back to his mansion because he pays them to do that. So he decides, I'm going to walk down there and see this village, is the story. And he walks into the village and he sees what we always see in towns and cities. We see people that are selling goods. Okay, that's interesting. But he also sees people that are poor. He sees people that are hurting. He sees people that are begging for food, who are starving. And he didn't know this was a thing. He's always had everything he's ever wanted. His servants have always eaten well because he wants them to be healthy and take care of him and all that stuff. So he basically, in modern terminology, feels guilty. If you've ever seen a homeless person, that doesn't mean you give, money to every person you see, but hopefully if you look at them, there's at least some part of your soul that goes, gosh, I feel sorry for that person. Because if you don't, a little empathy goes a long way. Doesn't mean, like I said, you always contribute, but at least there should be part of you that goes, oh my gosh, my fellow human is suffering. I hate that for them, at least at a minimum. Okay? And Buddha feels that way. And so he decides to do something kind of interesting. He decides to leave his home, his wealth, his servants, his family, and go out on the road and seek answers. All right? I'm going to draw you a little diagram. You don't have to know the words necessarily, but Buddha had lived what we would call, in fancy words, a hedonistic life. He had wealth, he had money. Hedonism is basically all of your natural desires are fulfilled.
How is that spelled?
Hedonism. I thought that was one of my better efforts, but okay. Hedonism. So if you are hedonistic, think of college spring break, or at least what movies have told you college spring break is like. That is hedonism. Partying, doing whatever you want, not worrying about anything else, because if you get in trouble, you can afford to get out of trouble. He's had that lifestyle. He decides to give all of it up. And he becomes the other extreme, which has a long tradition in India. Various faiths that we won't talk about practice what's called asceticism. That is ASCETICISM. ASCETICISM. And if your screen is like mine, where people's pictures are in the way of the right-hand side of the board, if you hit the little line in the top left of your box where our pictures are, and if you hit that, it'll minimize the faces and you'll see the whole board. So if you find yourself, because I'm looking at my whiteboard, I can see it all. When I'm looking at my screen, the right-hand side of my board is covered up by some of your faces. So it doesn't matter to me because I know what I'm writing. But if you can't see my writing, you can hit that little small tab on the top left and it'll minimize and you can then see the whole board. Okay, so to be an ascetic is you have nothing. You have no possessions. You wear rags, barely covering yourself. You don't have any food, and you basically only beg for food when you're about to starve. So a hedonist has all of everything. An ascetic has pretty much nothing. And Buddha spends, as far as we know, several years wandering around as an ascetic. When we think of the Buddha, our image in the West is often a big guy with a big belly, and he's kind of happy. There are many images of Buddha incredibly, painfully worried about his health, skinny, ribs sticking out, that kind of thing, because he lived that life for a couple of years as well. And the story goes that one day he is sitting under a tree where today you can visit the great grand tree of that original tree, and Buddha has an idea. He becomes enlightened. And what his idea is pretty simple. I have had both extreme lifestyles. All of my wealth and pleasures did not give me satisfaction. I have spent several years wandering around trying to find enlightenment with nothing or no possessions. That has not helped me. He decides to call his new idea the middle path. And you should have read about this the last couple days, whenever you did your reading. The middle path. Not one extreme, not another, but in the middle. Think of it like Goldilocks, right? And the three bears. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. All right? So you're searching for your middle path. So the actions of a Buddhist are to find that middle path. Now that is a little more difficult. I'm going to erase the screen and do one more. You don't need to memorize all of these things. We don't memorize the 10 Commandments or the 5 Pillars of Islam, or in this case, we're not going to memorize what are called the 4 Noble Truths, but I want to at least broadly explain them. There are 4 truths that can help you become enlightened. Find your middle path. Because if I was going to summarize Buddhism, here's the key phrase. It's your middle path. It's not your parents. It's not your teachers. It's not somebody you pay money to help you find the answer. You have to find your middle path. And only you can find it. And it ain't easy. Because if you sit down and you put in your calendar, I will find enlightenment today, schedule 20 minutes. Not going to happen. Buddha found enlightenment while sitting down taking a rest from his walk. And it just came to him. He wasn't thinking about it. He wasn't trying to achieve it. It just happened. Okay? So here are the broad truths. Number one, life is suffering. I think we can all relate to that these days in the time of the pandemic. And I hope that you and your family are healthy and you're living comfortably. But life has been rough the last couple months for all of us. Some more than others, obviously. But life has been rough. And I think we can all acknowledge that. We will suffer. People we love will be mean to us. Our friends will turn their back on us on occasion. We will put ourselves out there and say we like someone, and they will tell us they do not like us. You will bust your butt all summer to try to make the team, and then you don't. You get cut the last day. It happens. Those kind of things happen to all of us. Your dog dies. I mean, stuff like that happens. It sucks, but it's part of life, and we have to acknowledge that. Now, why do we suffer? He says suffering happens because we desire. We want things. We look forward to things. We focus a lot of our attention on acquiring things. We don't enjoy the journey. We focus on the results. And Buddha says there's nothing wrong with wanting to go on vacation, with looking forward to your birthday because your family takes you out to a nice restaurant once a year and you don't normally get that kind of high quality, expensive food. Looking forward to this weekend and your family is you normally have a big derby party. This year you're going to have a small derby party, but it's still kind of a fun tradition. You're looking forward to some kind of normalcy, even though it won't be a normal derby. All those kind of things. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but here's this problem. Let me give you an example that some of my students I've seen before. Every time you unlock your phone, you have a calendar that says spring break 2021 on your, and you're like counting down the days to your going on spring break to your whatever, especially if you normally would get to go on a family vacation every year. And this year it didn't happen because of COVID. So you're especially looking forward to, oh my gosh, oh, the beach. I love the beach and I'm going to go to the beach. And you just, 65 days, 47 days, 34 days. Oh yeah. Your suitcase is packed. You're ready to go 2 weeks early. We have found a vaccine or at least some level of way to minimize the damage COVID can do. And your family's going and you're going to have a normal, you can like not wear a mask on the beach. Like you're so excited. And you get there and it rains every day for a week. And you spent all this time looking forward to this thing, overlooking so many other things that could have been fun or interesting. And then it disappointed you. Buddha says the problem is not the event. It's not the doing things. It's not the having favorite ideas or activities or meals or people. It's the focusing on that thing at the expense of everything else in our lives. It's dreaming about that person you like asking you out. And then you see him the next day in the hallway walking arm in arm with your friend, or shall I say former friend. Okay? That kind of stuff happens. So we have to lower our expectations. We have to not focus on the end. We have to focus on every day there is something good to gain. There is a powerful thing we can learn and grow with. There's positivity in our lives every single day if we look for it. And we have to do that. And sometimes that's hard. So how do we stop suffering then? We stop desiring. And this is where it gets personal. Because you and I have different interests, I imagine. I'm a 41-year-old dude, and you guys are 15 or 16-year-old teenagers. We probably have different interests. And for me, giving something up that I love may be really hard. And for you, you could give up what I love because we don't love the same thing. I've been a U of L basketball and football season ticket holder for as long as I can remember. And I am so excited to go sit outside for 3 games this year and wear a mask and socially distance outside of my family and all that kind of stuff. But I'm excited because I miss live events. I go to like 100 to 150 concerts a year. During a normal school year, I go to concerts 2 nights a week, average. That's my jam. I hadn't been to a concert since February 28th. Now, I'm thankful I'm healthy. I'm thankful I have a job. I'm thankful I can pay my bills. I'm thankful that no one I love has been severely affected by COVID in terms of their health. I have a lot to be thankful for. But there are times I go, ugh. And if you tell me you haven't gone in the last 5 months, you're lying, because you have. Okay? We all have, because it sucks. It's just the way it is. If we could just find joy in spending time with our family, even though some of us have spent too much time with our family, okay, we could see the positive. If we know that in the grand scheme of our lives, for most of us, this is going to be just a tiny, tiny percentage of our overall life, and this will pass, and we will return to some semblance of normality in the near future, whenever that is. But that's hard. That's someday, if you have kids, you can tell your kids that story and be like, oh yeah, it was like 7, 8 months, and we got through it. It was fine. And but right now, in the middle of month 5, you're like, oh God, I don't know. And that's completely understandable. Buddha says you should be able to deal with it. That's pretty hard. If you love to go shopping for whatever, I don't like shopping. I buy most of my stuff online because I don't like going to the stores. Never have. I don't like trying on clothes, none of that. So for me to give up shopping, no problem. But for some of you, oh my gosh, that'd be awful. Even if you don't buy anything, just like the process. So you have to stop desiring what you particularly love and focus on. You can still have those experiences, but you're not fixated on them. And you do that through a series of steps. Without going into too much detail, it's basically right moral behavior. Correct moral behavior will allow you to have this idea. Because you're like, Mr. Rich, I could never give up the thing I love the most. Well, Buddha says if you train and practice and work on your morality, eventually you potentially could. And then someday it'll just happen. Now, here's where it gets tricky. There are different kinds of Buddhists. They're included in your study guide. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, but broadly speaking, here's what you need to know. There are 2 major groups of Buddhists. Both are in your study guide. And I don't think your textbook actually mentioned this. So this is something that's in your study guide, or maybe I think they're like bullet pointed in the margin. I think they did. Mahayana.
In the paragraphs.
Yeah, they each got like a couple paragraphs.
That's right. Yeah. I'm still remembering, because I read your textbook, but like 2 months ago, so I still sometimes have to remember, is it the old book or the new book? So yes, it's in there. Thank you for correcting me. I appreciate it. I do. So the Mahayana and the Theravada. Now, you don't need to memorize a lot of details here, but broadly speaking, does anyone remember from your reading which one's the majority? The more popular version.
I think
The
it's
Theravada.
Actually, it's the Mahayana. Okay? The Mahayana is about 55 to 60% of Buddhists. Its nickname is called the Greater Vehicle because, according to non-Mahayana Buddhists, it's the easier version. It doesn't require as much meditation, separating yourselves from the world. Like, you can be a Mahayana Buddhist on a busy schedule. And the Theravada Buddhists think it's the easy version. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree, but that is their interpretation. All right? For example, one way you can be a good Mahayana Buddhist is to donate money to support Buddhist charities or causes. And the Theravada are like, I spent 12 hours meditating yesterday, and you just wrote a check or used PayPal or Venmo, So to them, they have some squabbles, okay? But when you think of Buddhists tend to be very peaceful people, nonviolent, and there are some exceptions to this. But for the most part, that is that kind of the fundamental belief of Buddhism, is that we do not engage in violence, not only against people, against animals. Some of the earliest animal rights laws ever created over 2,000 years ago are in a Buddhist kingdom in India. So very interesting in that belief in the sacredness of all life, not just human, but of all creatures on this planet are sacred, and we should respect their right to live and all that good stuff.
Do they have the same belief as in Hinduism that everything has a soul? Or
Yes, that is correct. Now, here's where it gets tricky and you need to be careful. And I'm not getting into the details. Your reading does a little bit, but some Buddhists believe that Buddha is a god, a deity, a higher power. Even though Buddha himself is quoted as saying, I am not a god, do not worship me, but some have taken to doing so. Others see Buddha as a spiritual guide, a helper, to follow his example, but not someone who is divine. Those Buddhists don't believe there is a higher power at all. So technically, kind of weirdly, it could be an atheistic religious belief, which doesn't make any sense if you just say the words. It depends on your version. So all Buddhists believe in the middle path. All Buddhists believe in the Four Noble Truths. All Buddhists believe that Buddha is a great spiritual guide, and we have handwritten records of his sermons and some of the things he taught when he was living by his followers. But there is also a lot of diversity about, is there a higher power, yes or no? Is there reincarnation? Some say yes, some say no. So when describing Buddhism, be careful to not try to say all Buddhists believe X or Y when they really don't, like reincarnation. Some Buddhists say there is no future, there is no past, there is only the present. All that matters is right now. Clearly, that person would not believe in reincarnation of the soul. All right? So there's more detail in your reading, but that's the broad strokes of it in terms of Buddhism. So here is my closing point on Buddhism, then we'll move to Confucianism, and that's probably about as far as we'll get today, and then we'll finish the rest of these next week.
Do they have a caste system like Hindus?
That is exactly what I was getting to. Excellent question, Lillian. Awesome. No, it's a good transition. Buddha founds this religion as a Hindu. So he clearly disagrees with some aspects of Hinduism. There is no caste. In fact, fancy word alert, let me erase. This is a great AP history word to use in your essays and short answers, kind of like diaspora. That's a great word. I have a couple other favorites I'll get to. Diaspora is a terrible thing, but it's a beautiful word, even though it describes a horrible thing. Kicking people out of their homes against their will is not good. The word we're looking for that describes Buddhism and many other religions as well is egalitarian. It comes from the French, égalité. I don't know if I have any Frenchies in here taking French. Anyone want to guess what that means? Or maybe you know. Nobody's in our French program?
I think it means all.
You're in the neighborhood. You are. It means equality for all. So Buddhism is an egalitarian religion. So therefore, do they have a caste system? Yes or no?
No.
No, correct. I would argue that is perhaps the most fundamental difference between Hinduism and Buddhism. If one were to write, I don't know, a short answer, maybe eventually when we learn essay types, maybe a comparative essay between the two faiths, that would be one of our differences we'd want to highlight. That Buddhism says all followers of the faith are equal.
Didn't he want like everybody to get enlightened?
Yes. But he also says it's hard. And I can give you examples, but you have to do it yourself because only you know what are your desires. And you have to figure out how to let some of that go. And it's not easy. And again, Buddha found enlightenment when he was not trying to achieve it. It just happened. Oh, and speaking of that, Buddha is a nickname. His real name is Siddhartha. Buddha means enlightened one. That's literally what the nickname Buddha means. Okay? And so Buddhism has impacted many people in the world, not just the 500 or 600 million Buddhists in the world, religion number 4 in terms of followers, but a common practice of a Buddhist is meditation. And many of us meditate who are not Buddhists. It's become increasingly popular, especially in Western countries like the United States. So if you have ever tried to meditate, that comes historically from a Buddhist religious practice. Okay, to clear your mind and just try to focus on what's important and not let your stresses and your challenges overwhelm you, which is much harder to do than it sounds like. All right, that's the broad strokes of Buddhism. Now, Buddhism, last question. Universalizing or ethnic?
Ethnic.
Universalizing.
Okay, it is in fact universalizing. We can spread Buddhism. It is, you're not going to necessarily be aggressive about it, but there is a Buddhist temple 5 minutes from Ballard High School on Hubbard's Lane. If you know where the recycling center is close, it's on that street, right down the street from there. It's right down the street from Hubbard's Lane where the Kroger is and the Target and that complex on Westport Road and Hubbard's Lane. If you go on Hubbard's Lane towards Brownsboro, that's where you will see the Buddhist temple. It's a former house they've converted into a Buddhist temple. And sometimes you might see Buddhist monks walking back from Target, back to the temple. They're wearing their saffron and red robes. Saffron's is a version of yellow. Shaved heads, all that good stuff. Okay, so that's Buddhism. Yeah, go ahead.
When I'll be quick and say, when I mentioned, when you asked like what was Judaism the first time I said ethnic, you said no, that was Buddhism, didn't you? Or did I hear you wrong?
No. Judaism is ethnic. Buddhism is universalizing.
But I thought you also said that Buddhism was also ethnic and it was the first ethnic.
Nope. Sorry. You might have misheard me. Sometimes there's a lag. But so far, we've looked at 3 religions: Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism.
Okay.
Hinduism and Judaism, both ethnic. Buddhism, universalizing.
So
Okay.
Hinduism is
Ethnic.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. No problem. You're good. Never feel bad about asking questions. That's why I'm here. Okay. So let's briefly talk about China and the philosophy of Confucianism. Now, if someone were to tell me, Mr. Rich, I'm a Confucian, that's my religion, who am I to tell you what you believe? But in my opinion, and many academics' opinion, the 2 major Chinese belief systems are Confucianism and Taoism, and those are philosophies and not religion. And not to get too far into it, because we only have about 10 minutes left, but broadly here is how it works. Religion generally does 2 major things. Provides for many people a sense of morals or ethical behavior. So like the 10 Commandments, that's a sense of moral codes. And 2, it tries to answer what I call the big questions. What happens when I die? What is my purpose in life? Why am I here? And they try to answer those questions. Many philosophies will do one or the other, but they often will not do both. For example, we mentioned the Greeks and the Romans earlier. Why isn't anyone, as soon as I get done today, going to go down to downtown Louisville and worship at the Temple of Apollo? I don't believe any of you are going to do that. And in fact, we don't call those belief systems religions anymore. We call them myths. And if you were to tell me, oh, Mr. Rich, I'm a Buddhist, cool. I was like, how did you start believing in that myth? You might get mad at me because I called your religion a myth. You'd be upset, and rightly so. But we call Greek and Roman religion myths, and nobody gets mad because nobody follows it anymore. And the reason nobody does is Greeks and Romans give you a lot of details about what happens when you die. Like there's a whole lot of references to the underworld, and for many centuries, cultures in the West, when you died, they would put coins on your eyes when your eyelids had been closed because they believed you had to cross to the river Styx, to the underworld, and you had to pay the boatman who would ferry you across. So they put a coin on your eye to pay him. Now that is not in any Western religious belief. That's not in the Bible or any Judaic text, none of that stuff. But that was a Greek and Roman belief. The problem with the Greeks and Romans is they didn't have a sense of morality. Their gods were awful. They behaved horrifically. Zeus is a serial rapist. He is. Zeus is awful. If you're like, Zeus is my boy, something's wrong with you. He's terrible. So I would argue that those religions fade because they don't give people a sense of a higher purpose. They don't give people something to look toward. If I want to know how to be bad, I can look in the mirror half the time, and I can look at my friends and family the rest of the time. Or in my case, I can look at my classes sometimes. Not you all, of course, but other people. So that's what happens. So now let's cross the world and go over to China very briefly. Confucianism does not get into what happens when I die. Why am I here? What is my purpose? It doesn't answer any of that. Confucianism is a philosophy that describes how to live your life on this planet while living. And Confucius lives at the same time as the Buddha. He's a real man as well. They didn't know each other. We have no evidence of them communicating or talking to each other ever. Neither of them left their home countries or territories. But Confucius is living in a time when China has civil war. And so oftentimes when you can't have something, you want the opposite. Like I have friends who I know don't like going out. They don't like going to the movies. They don't like going to concerts. They don't like doing, they'd rather stay at home versus I am somebody, I'm out all the time and I prefer to do that. But I have friends who are like, gosh, I just want to go to the movies. They're like, when's the last time you went to a movie? 4 years ago. What? But they just like, it'd just be nice to do like something out like that. So sometimes we want what we don't have. So Confucius lives in a time of civil war, of chaos, of violence. He writes about order, structure, how to live a peaceful, calm life. Okay? Confucius was a teacher. That was his occupation. And so teachers tend to be, not all of us, I know you can say I've had teachers, and you're probably right, but teachers tend to believe that education can improve us. We can learn and grow and become better. And not just with our knowledge, but with our behavior. Okay? If we were in school as normal, part of the first couple weeks of school in any classroom, even at your all's age, is learning what the expectations are, learning what the limits are, learning what the rules are. For example, for me, I don't care if you go to the bathroom. My pass is always on the little lip of a board right by my door. I just ask that you let me know you're going, so I actually know that you're gone and I should expect you back. But I've never told a kid they couldn't go to the bathroom in my entire teaching career. If you go every day, at some point I'm going to ask you if you have a medical condition and if I can help you with that, or who are you meeting in the hallway? But it's a weird idea. Me as a teacher, part of what I believe is my job as a teacher is to make sure that you don't want to be gone long because you know you're missing something you need. So it's on me to help you not want to run around the halls and miss my class. Also, I followed kids in the hall before and caught them, and then I rip them. So you've done, oh yeah. I know y'all are so bad at hiding stuff. It's terrible. Well, my mom doesn't know. Your mom has 2 or 3 or 4 or how many kids your mom had. I have thousands. So I see this, and I see you in one setting mostly. So I've seen it before a lot. Whatever it is you're doing, I've seen it before. Trust me. So anyway, Confucius wants order.
How do you spell Confucius's name?
Confucius, C-O-N-F-U-C-I-U-S.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So order, structure, have some rules. Let's follow them. Let's have a little, oh yeah. Okay. Just, yeah. All right. He also talks about relationships. Who should you listen to? How do you get guidance? Now, remember, we mentioned this briefly the other day. China is a place where the most common religious belief is we believe our dead ancestors can help us from beyond to answer questions. Ancient Chinese people would write like almost, if anybody ever seen a magic 8-ball, you ask a question, you shake it up, it says yes or no. Hey, Brady, don't draw on my screen, thanks. So that happened in ancient China. They believed you would ask a question of the gods. You would take animal bones, turtle shells, whatever, write 2 possible answers and throw that turtle shell into the fire. And as it started to burn and crackle, part of it would get dark and you couldn't read it anymore. And after a couple minutes, you pull it out of the fire, and they believed the answer you could see better was not just the fire burning stuff, but your ancestor spirits guiding the fire, which answer to remain visible. So that's how they would communicate from the other world. So that's what they believe. So in China, who are you going to most listen to? Old people. We got 5 minutes left. This will be our last idea. We'll do Taoism, Christianity, and Islam in class on Tuesday or Wednesday. All right, so who are you going to listen to? Old people. Why? They have life experience you haven't had. They have gone through things you haven't gone through. You should listen to them and take their advice. just what every teenager wants to hear. Right? Always listen to old people. Not when you feel like it, not always. Mr. Rich, they don't mean always. Yes, they do. In Confucianism, you always listen to your elders. Now, this is still a patriarchal society, so if grandma and grandpa disagree, then you go with grandpa. Because, men are better and stuff. That's what they believed. But it's older people are better. Now, I'll give you 2 examples and we'll call it a day. Let's assume that you have decided that you want to get a giant tattoo on your back of a dragon because you think dragons are awesome. I would agree. You are 16. Legally, you cannot get a tattoo without parental permission until you are 18. Your mother has said, no way over my dead body are you going to get a tattoo. And so you're like, well, when I'm 18, I'm going to do what I want. Okay. So you decide that at family Thanksgiving dinner, when multiple generations of your family are together, we're just trying to keep the peace. We're hoping nobody gets drunk or argues about football or politics. And you decide to make an announcement that you, in 2 years' time, are getting a giant tattoo of a dragon on your back. Your grandmother begins openly weeping at the table and talking about how this will shame your family. And you all don't get tattoos. And you're like, well, my cousin has one, but it's under her, it's on her back, so nobody sees it or whatever. But that's beside the point. And your grandma's like, sweetheart, I love you. Don't get this tattoo. It'll shame our family. Now, you love your grandma. You don't want her to cry. You hug her and say, Grandma, I love you. Okay. Now in America, you'll do that. You'll be like, Grandma, I love you, Mimi, Mama, whatever you call her. You say, love you. Okay, Grandma. And then what are you going to do anyway later on? Whatever you want. You just lie about it. You'll hide it, right? In a Confucian household, in a Confucian society, if grandma said don't do it, you don't do it. Because, and feel free to write this down, your elders always know what's best for you. Do you at 15 years old believe your parents always know what's best for you? Probably not. In America, we tend to have the stereotype of the rebellious teenager. Oh, old people are stupid. They don't get me. Oh, Mom, did I do some of that when I was a kid? Of course I did. I remember PRP High School was in the state baseball championship right at the beginning of the summer after my sophomore year. I couldn't drive yet, but I had a friend who was going. And in fact, I think his mom was driving and she was going to take like 5 or 6 of us down there. And my dad said, you're not good. I've never met this woman. I don't know her. I don't know if she's a good driver. I've never heard of this kid as a friend of yours. And to be honest, he really wasn't my buddy, but he was going down there, so I wanted to go. And my dad said no. And my mom said no. And I got so mad and I pouted. And in the long run, as I get older, I get it. But when I was 16, I was fired up. Oh, man, my parents, you don't want me to have any fun ever. Blah, 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 all this ridiculousness. Your parents always know what's best for you. One last story, then we're done. Several years ago in class, we were talking about the same material, and I asked my kids, does anybody feel like you have Confucian influence in your life? And one young man raised his hand. His name was Tuan. Tuan's family was Vietnamese, first-generation Vietnamese American immigrants. And one of the things about Confucianism is, as China grows more powerful in the world, they spread their ideas, including Confucianism. So you see Confucianism in Japan, in Southeast Asia, in places like Vietnam, where Tuan's family's from. And I said, Tuan, and I didn't know what he was going to say. I said, Tuan, tell us what influence Confucianism has in your life. And he said, Mr. Rich, if my parents told me to jump off a bridge, I would jump because I knew they would have a reason for me doing that, and I would be safe because they would take care of me. And he said, my parents always know what's right for me, and I always do it. And every kid in the room, including your teacher, was like, what? What? You don't? And I was waiting for like a wink or a nod or, oh, I'm just kidding. Serious as he could be. He's like, my parents always know what's right for me. And the rest of the class was like, this dude has lost his mind. Because we do believe that our family loves and cares for us, but that they're always right? No. I tell my students, I know there's days you're going to walk out of my room and you're mad at me because I did something to make you mad. And I don't care. That's okay. Because in the long run, you're going to love me because I'm lovable and I'm awesome. So that's just how it works. But short term, there's going to be days when that is not true. So he believed that literally his parents were always right. So how do you behave in a Confucian society? Last thought. You follow the rules, you pay attention, you do what you are told, and you always, 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 always follow what the older people tell you to do. If that is the case, will you have structure and order in that society? Yeah. But what won't you have? Give me an example and then we'll finish.
They'll lose some freedom of choice in a way.
Yeah, there ain't no freedom of choice. That is a great answer. Creativity? Not unless we tell you to be creative. So yeah, that we're definitely not going to have that. And for most of Chinese history, its government is more dictatorial or authoritarian. That is the fundament. That is the way it is. Which is why many of us that are raised in a democratic system like the United States go, I'm not going to do what everybody tells me to do. I'm going to, blah, blah, blah. Because we are raised to, it's my rights, it's my choice, it's my belief. And in many Asian societies, including those that practice Confucianism, it is what's best for the group, what's best for all of us, not just what's best for me. Okay? And that is often a fundamental difference between those societies in Asia and those societies in Western parts of the world. All right, thank y'all for your attention. This recording will be posted